Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be continuing our series on the middle game strategies, and we're going to do a two-part series here, and we're going to go over the key concept of trading. A lot of chess players really don't know when they should be trading, especially during the middle game when things are flying everywhere. They just don't know if a trade is good, a trade is bad, and so today we're going to be going over when you should trade and when you shouldn't trade. And so we're going to, 4 key concepts that I want you to remember. The first one is you should trade when you're ahead in material. And that's what we're going to be going over in part 1. The second is you should trade if you have a spatial disadvantage, and we'll be going over what that means. You should also trade if your exchange will make one of your pieces really strong. So if you can trade and get like a great outpost for one of your pieces, you should do that. And lastly, if one of your opponent's pieces is really strong, you should obviously trade that off as well. So if we can go ahead and take a look at this board here, obviously this board, white and black are both even. We can start off, let's say we take one of the pawns away from black. Now white has a 1-pawn advantage, and that may not seem like a lot, but if we start trading off pieces, let's say we trade off the rooks here, white's advantage is getting bigger, okay? And we can see that. Let's say we trade off both of these knights and bishops in a trade. Obviously I'm just deleting them here, but in the game you would obviously just trade them off. You may not be able to see it, but white is getting a bigger and bigger advantage. And let's say we trade off our queens and the rest of our minor pieces. So I'll go ahead and take those off the board here, and we'll just be left with the pawns. And you'll look at it and see that white has all 8 of its pawns to black's 7 pawns. And as we're taking these pieces off, white's advantage is growing and growing. Before we had 16 pieces and black started out with 15. And now we have 9 pieces and black only has 8. And if we start to take away some of, let's say we start taking off some of the pieces, I just took off 5 from each side. Now black is left with 2 and white is left with 3. Obviously a much bigger advantage, and all we're doing is trading off one by one. And as you can see it, if we do one more, now white has a 2-to-1 advantage. 2-to-1 advantage is obviously a much bigger, and then we can even go one step farther and take away another pawn. And now white is clearly winning. It has a pawn, black has no pieces except the king. White's in very good shape here. So if you have a material advantage, you should be trading to reach an endgame where your advantage is greater. So in part 1 of our series, that is what we're going to be going over. We're going to be going over if you have an advantage in material, what you should do and what you should not do. Because a lot of times you get to a stage where you may be up a pawn, you may be up 2 pawns, and you try to get too fancy, and it may work, it may not, when you could just make things simple and take away all the pieces, and what you'd be left with is a clear advantage. A lot of people don't even look at that when really they should. So I'm going to go ahead and give you this position right here, and it's white's move. And think about, just for a moment, if you want to pause it, what white should do here. So take a minute, pause, think what white should do. And if you look at it here, white is up a pawn, and it may not look like white has a distinct advantage, but in actuality they do. White's best move here is white captures this knight on c6. And yes, you could look at it and say, well, white's bishop is good because it's an open game. Bishops are obviously better in open games, and that's true, but in this case we can easily get to an endgame where we have a huge advantage. So since we're up a pawn, this piece is going to allow us to quickly get to an endgame where we know we can win. So from here, black is forced to take with his pawn, and now white can use all of his pieces to sacrifice all the pieces except the pawn. So white can just come here with his rook, black is forced to take with his rook, white can recapture on d8, black is forced to capture with his rook, white can come with his queen to d8. Obviously, as you can see, we're just trading pieces off. Now black is forced to come to f8. And now white can do the last piece, and we're traded off at f8. And here, it's a lot easier to see that white has an advantage. White has 6 pawns, and black has 5 pawns. And a lot of people could look at the position before and completely miss the win, and a lot of times mess up and lose the game. But here we're going to go over why it's so important if you're up in material to trade down in later stages of the game. So from here it's a pretty clear win, and we're going to go over how that's a pretty clear win. When you go from the middle game going in towards the end game, your king becomes your most valuable piece. Obviously if you have queens and stuff, those are, but in a pawn and king endgame, you want to activate your king, and that's a very important concept in any game. So white wants to activate his king as quickly as possible. So, you know, he may bring it to a2. Now, black at the same time may know this as well, so he may try to come to e7. And white can continue, and we can bring our piece to d3. Black can continue to d6. Now from here, white can do a simple move of b4 with intentions of bringing his king to the d4 square. Eventually what we want is to trade off these pawns with one pawn on the queen side, obviously the ABC squares, and distract the black king enough so that we can come over here to the king side and gobble up all these pawns and have a clear advantage. So let's say from here, let's say black has, let's say, a subtle move of f6. He doesn't want to commit anything. So from here we can bring our king into the action. Obviously he can bring his pawn to c5, but we have our nice little pawn on b4, and he can't bring his pawn to the a5 square because then we can just take with our b pawn and march up the board here. So he might move his g pawn here, and from here we can continue to march up the board with our a pawn. There's not a whole lot he can do. He may bring his pawn to the f5 square. And from here we can create two weaknesses. We can go ahead and march right up the middle with b5. And if he wants to trade his pieces off, let's say he just trades here, and then we trade, and then he trades, and then we trade. Now we have a pawn here that the black king has to do something about. And so let's say he comes back to the c7 square to protect. We can come up here to the c5 square, and whenever time we want, the black king has to defend. If the black king moves off this c file to the d file, we can just march up the board here and make it queen. So the black king is going to have to come to the b file, and once he does that, white can easily start marching his king to the other side and start gobbling up these pawns here. So from here, black can come. He's obviously going to take this pawn, but he's not going to have time to recover. We can come to the e6 square. Once he takes, obviously you can see the advantage. Black can start to come. He can try to move his pawn. It's not really going to matter. Black king can continue. He can come down here, try to get ours. There's nothing he can do. We can start marching up our h pawn. It's a very clear win for white, and this all came about because of our trading that we did when we were ahead of material. So even in a position that looks almost even, if you have a material advantage and you can get down to a very defined win, as in a pawn and king endgame, and you know how to play a pawn and king endgame correctly, it's a very straightforward win. So this is part one of trading and how you should trade. Obviously, key number one is trade if you're ahead of material, because it gives you a bigger advantage. So hope this helps. Hope during your game, if you have an advantage in material, that you're always looking out for ways that you can get closer to the end game. and I hope this helps bring you a lot more wins. So look out for part 2, should be up shortly, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks a lot.